Welcome to the DAO community call for 11th of November. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands from which we all meet today. I join you again from Wurundjeri land, and that we extend our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. Also a reminder of our Lawfi DAO values and beliefs of respect, reciprocity, I said it right this time, integrity and kindness while doing things differently and appreciating that time is our most precious resource. And finally, that you are being recorded, and if you have any issues with being seen or heard now or subsequently, please send an email to jp@lawfidao.com and we'll make sure that that's edited out for you. So today is, again, a very short agenda. The work over the past week has really been leading up to preparing for our first educational meeting with ASIC today. So thank you to those that have reviewed the draft presentation and the slides and given feedback. I've been incorporating that, and I'll share the latest version shortly before the 11 a.m. today. Now, because of that preparation, I'm proposing that we don't go ahead with our establishment workstream session at 10:15 today. So Miles, I note you're an apology anyway. Andrew, I may just give you a call in preparation for the ASIC meeting anyway.
Yep.
Okay, great. And then we can probably do a debrief after the ASIC meeting also and see what update is appropriate to share via Discord and determine our next steps. So the main thing that I wanted to focus on today was a discussion on how we activate our existing 35 odd members. We're going through the process, a pretty important process of working through our establishment structure and our plan of action. And a lot of the members, actually most if not all, attended the general meeting. But the question is, how do we enliven our membership base in and around those formal and mandatory gatherings where at least a majority needs to express a vote? We all know that we haven't got our token, any of our tokens launched yet, nor a clear plan of action on how they might be used to incentivize members. So absent that, and in these preliminary stages, and Greg, thank you so much for all of the thoughts that you've been sharing with me so far. If you feel so minded, I'd love for you to share them here. But also welcome everybody else. What your initial thoughts are, why you think people might be scared to be more actively contributing to Lawfi DAO at the moment, how we might do things differently. So I'll open it up. and Greg, sorry to pick on you if you wanted to go first or last with some of the things you've been sharing already.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to do it. My view is there's a lot going on with Lawfi DAO. This is quite a big thing in terms of the legal structure, in terms of budget, in terms of how you're going to design your model for pay to rely, what tokens you're going to use, all the other things you wanted to do. It's quite a vast undertaking to get that all up and going, and all it written in a white paper in a digestible form. And I think probably my feeling is it probably needs to be a bit more of a journey for people and do it a bit of a step at a time. As to what that journey looks like, I haven't been involved from day one, so I'm not sure where everybody's mind is at and how much how deep they understand what we're trying to do. But an alternative approach, rather than try and have a whole white paper signed off, another approach is just probably the other extreme, the middle ground, but the other extreme is to say, okay, first and foremost, let's get established. All right, let's just register as we need to register, make sure we know our regulatory requirements, financial filing requirements, tax requirements, whatever. What's the simplest, easiest way just to get this thing registered, and maybe even you issue some founder tokens. And that's it. So once you got it set up and you've got your founders, then you move the the whole community then discusses, okay, well, what's the next thing we need to do? And what's the next thing? It's almost from project managers like an agile approach rather than design it all and do waterfall. You actually just take it a step at a time and let the community help decide the priorities as well as how to do it. So, okay, you probably need people to work out how the pay to rely model is going to work, what the operational implications are. You probably need to say, well, we won't bother trying to be, we'll be maybe a not-for-profit to start with because it's just easier. There's fewer obligation with ASIC. But down the track, we may decide to commercialise it, but let's park that for now. So pick the easy wins, get up, get going, get some momentum, and then feed things to the community a bit at a time for them to digest a piece at a time over a period rather than trying to solve the whole lot up front. Now, as I said, you may pick a middle ground and think, well, that's too simple. There's a bunch of things you do want to do at the beginning and have to work on that. But I just, from what I am interpreting, it was probably a lot for people to absorb, and it had to be across a whole lot of dimensions, and that's hard unless you engaged deeply across it. But
well, and I'll just jump in and then I'll open it to everybody. That you're being very kind in your public feedback, and as you've always been privately with me. But a big thing that is a criticism on me too is I've taken a lot of the lead in writing the white paper out of a sense of responsibility, to keep the project moving, but also these legal titles that we have in the model rules of an unincorporated association of president and secretary also put a higher amount of liability and responsibility on me to make sure that it's being done, and that's translated into me not acting in a DAO first way and going ahead and writing a full draft of the white paper rather than taking it in more bite-sized chunks, and that's been an extremely hard behavior to unlearn, to not take on and want to complete a task and then present it to the community just to build it and have the journey with the community. So that was full and frank feedback, and I really appreciate it, Greg. And it's definitely a learning for me to have to go through an untrained, centralized ways of thinking and myself do more of a DAO first style. It's quite hard, actually.
It is. It is. I mean, it needs someone to drive it, right? And it's kind of your baby. You feel attached to it. Yes, you've got to get it up and running. It needs someone in that role. And I think you'll actually find it helpful if you do take. I'm not a big one for committees, but the DAO sort of sets itself up for committees. So, okay, well, yes, you help coordinate, but then you get different committees set up and they go solve things, right? And they play back to the community about what their options are and what their recommendations are. And I think that takes a lot of the pressure off you to solve everything.
Well, thank you. And anybody, Gordon, I know you've been itching to get all of the community building underway, and you've got a fantastic network. Feel free to answer or to say you might answer later, but what do you feel is the main thing holding you back from activating a community, or apart from me saying hold the brakes until we get the regulator approvals?
Yeah, for sure. It's, I guess, listening to the people with the wisdom that, we can go out and bring a lot of people in here, but, having a clarity about what we're doing and where we're going. So I think there's a couple of things here, who are the core contributors. In any organisation, there's going to be the absolute core contributors. I'll say, I guess, the core team who have to make these decisions about, like, ultimately we can get the feedback from the community, but then someone has to make the decision to press the button to do next steps. So, for example, you put up that question about do we go to the next step? Someone has to make those decisions, but then we've got those core contributors. So there's probably only going to be around 20 people. Then it'd be core contributors. And like Greg was saying, they might operate in committees because they've got to get stuff done. We've got work to do. And then after that, I guess we've got who are going to be the actual, I guess, participants. So people that might be the lawyers that are going to use the pay to rely model, or, you know, to submit work. So who are the DAO builders and the like? So the real core people that are going to use the service. And then there's all the observers that are just, and explorers that are going to be coming in from time to time. So at the moment, I think that from the outset, there's 20 members in the organization. So they should be the active contributors. Otherwise, why are they here? So getting those 20 activated first, I think would be really critical. For the second thing for me as well, I'm not one to take in large volumes of information. So breaking down the DAO as to a one-pager, maybe just 5 points, what we're about. Our first one is that we are testing the regulations, or if that's the right word. Second, we are having a pay to rely model. Third, who would be the people who would use LawFi DAO? And there might be one other point, but just so that they can look at it and go, oh, that's a community I want to join.
Thank you, Gordon. And Andrew, I know you've probably got some things to say, because we're not a co-op and the rules of our association don't require active participation of members, which, you know, should we change our rules? Should we go to another vote and try to, should we put it in the rules, or should we just sort of softly ask which members are seeking to actively participate or be in that category of explorers or observers?
So I think we need to step the conversation up to a more holistic level. I've mentioned previously that I see the same sort of characteristics in the group that contribute into LawFi DAO as you do in, we'll call it tradition being a very short-term context of tradition of a protocol-led DAO. And I think our broader step here is to look at what is possible out of these sorts of organisations, and where does the future go with these organisations. And it starts with in LawFi DAOs, so the clues are in the purpose. If we look at our purpose, we don't have one purpose. We have 3 or 4 purposes, and what they deliver is they deliver what I would classify as different operating model classes. So on one layer, we're looking at pay to rely as a commercial piece. At another, we're looking at public education. We're looking at public good. We've considered non-for-profit. There's a whole series of different things we're looking at there. And that in itself, A, means focus is hard, but B, it means you're more than likely dealing with different regulators who have different operating mandates and different things that they are looking for. So the challenge is to work through and address which are in priority order, what are the pieces we want to do, and how do we put together the capability to do that, working within the known, but also being aware of what's not known. And then we can figure out what we do or don't do about that down the track. So we favour, and I'm talking from a multilateral point of view here, but it's very much part of my drive too, is we really look at holistic design from the ground up. So we're starting a native digital organisation here. We've got a number of professional classes that are already attracted here, who have their own rules that they have of engagement they have to do in their day-to-day life. And you look there at legal is obviously the biggest one, because that's the biggest group, but we also have accounting standards. We also have insurance. So they are all things that in the real world, forget about Web3 for a moment, they have rules that they have to follow and people they have to report to and all the rest of it. So all of these component parts all need to be brought together. Then you say, well, okay, the best way to get people activated is to give them a framework to, it's always easier to write than edit than it is to write. So we really need people to contribute and buy into the process of the building itself in the first instance of where we're going. And so one of the things for the rest of the group on this call that I've presented to Jody is a very light scale blueprint modelling workshop series that actually shapes out the framework and gets everybody's viewpoints and how these things work, so that we can work through all the different layers that need to be contributed into a, back to your point, Greg, about a project management type style of building together a framework. Now, the challenge with that is people's attention span and people's ability and time to put into this, not helped by where we are in the time of the year as well. But to do this properly, it really needs, under the model we've designed, it really needs probably, I'll say 3 workshops of about an hour and a half each, all set up with agendas, some homework to do beforehand, some analysis work that we'll do in the background between sessions to help with that driving component. And that's a hard thing to do in terms of pulling this group together at this time of the year as well. Jody, you had your hand up.
Oh no, I was just saying bye to Miles. He's
had
to jump out quickly. That's right. Didn't mean to interrupt, but
no, that's okay. So what we're currently thinking about is how we compress that into a, let's call it a campaign, to attract those 20, 35 people to participate in a program in the new year. That's laid out as to how they get involved, where are the benefits for them to get involved. And the idea is to bring everybody, and if we go back to the values of the DAO, which you laid up at the beginning, Joni, it's really about that reciprocity piece and that generosity of spirit in this first instance. And yes, people need to see that there is something in it for them down the track, but you've got to put the hard yards in first. And the best chance to do that is to be invited to come in and help with the build and design in the first place.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. And I noticed we've had Arturo and Vic join in the meantime. Welcome. We're just inviting feedback and comments on how we activate our membership of 35 odd members in this period where we haven't launched any tokens or our protocol yet, but it's that critical design phase in designing the organization to be what the members want it to be. So
Joni,
Arturo,
if I can, Joni, just to comment, yeah, I mean, the 35 members that you make now, there might be, we don't know exactly, it's probably getting some clarity off them. There might just be 15 observers, say, for example. So, and then I think back to the point of the type of organisation we have is not having a requirement of paid up members to be involved. Well, so be it. There's going to be actual people that are contributors anyway. I don't know what that looks like for them financially, but if they do come in, you know, I think just finding a good core contributors, actual contributors.
Yeah, agree. Thanks, Gordon. Mark, did you want to offer any thoughts or comments, or Vic or Arturo? It's okay to say no.
Oh, no, I'm just going to say, as a practicing lawyer, I know that some are anxious about. So I'm at a firm, and I'm starting the discussions at our firm about, you know, implications of joining, just to make sure that's okay. And I'm sort of leading those discussions for some of the others who have, you know, been participating but may not be members yet. So anyway, that's not a criticism of a lack of certainty. It's more of a criticism of me of lack of having thought through that and progress those discussions. But that's, I think, that reluctance might be more widespread as well.
Yeah, and we haven't actively approached law firms to say, you know, what do you need to be a member, you know, an observing member or a more active contributor, or do you just want to use the pay to rely protocol when it's ready? That sort of community building and engagement hasn't commenced either. So I take your feedback, Mark. Vic or Arturo, any comments from you? Otherwise, take them on notice.
Yeah, no, thank you. Nothing yet.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if there's no further comments on that discussion, we can open up to just a general discussion on what's been happening in the blockchain Web3 token markets this week. I think we're all a bit in shock. But I'll just pause to see if anybody wanted to raise anything LawFi DAO specific before we get into a general discussion.
Joni, yeah, just I think I saw a discussion there just about, do we take the next step, whatever it is, and like almost ignore some of the regs? Is that right?
Well, no, take the next step in the most conservative fashion to be completely non-for-profit, no mixing, you know, because a big part of a transferable token is that its value can go up and down. So for us, that's really in the money token, but the pay to rely, you know, depending on if we have the full bells and whistles or just, we might have just the very, very basic protocol so that there is no peer review in the initial implementation. So there's no revenue splitting. We just literally go bite-sized chunk by bite-sized chunk. And we may not achieve our roadmap, key of which might be regulatory reasons. We just can't release those sorts of things in a not-for-profit model.
Sure.
Or we might have to agree as a member base that if that's really important to users or lawyers, that thing is commercialized in a separate vehicle that's more appropriate to do so. Okay,
thanks for clearing that up. Yeah, because many of the things happening in the space right now are just like, because everyone's just gone, let's go for it, and then look what the aftermath is. Thanks for that.
Yeah, and it's a good segue too, because like I said, it's just a shock to all of us that it's, you know, we've had another hit in 2022, as if we haven't already had enough. And I think the calls for proof of reserves, particularly on centralized exchanges, just go to the underpinnings of blockchain technology, that we've had these centralized institutions that have allowed us to do trading of tokens more easily, but we've gotten away from the transparency that blockchain introduced, to at least give us proof that the entity we're entrusting to store our tokens or allow us to trade more easily is holding it as if it's a customer deposit one-to-one. And so all of these calls for now proof of reserves in the industry, you know, and I haven't seen a policy regulator say, oh, that's a great idea, that's what we should run with first. You can see that industry is already recognizing we need to go back to the fundamentals of why blockchain is important. At least that's my observation.
I think it's an interesting one, because I'm not an expert in how stock trading firms or brokerages run their things, but I'm pretty sure that if you own stock through one of these venues, then that actual equity is yours, and it's not that it gets commingled, which is why you have the separation of assets. Therefore, the actual proof of reserve, if you do it properly, you shouldn't even need that. I think, because you just have this is your wallet, these are the assets in your wallet, and they're already separated. So proof of reserve is only a thing if you're actually commingling everything, and you want to make sure that there's a token that represents your ownership within this bigger portfolio, right? I'm not sure that's that's the right approach, to be honest.
Well, at least we're starting the discussion. And in TradFi, you know, stock trade, share trading, there is securities lending, and there's documentation and there's frameworks for all of that short-term liquidity and trading that helps price discovery. But that's been happening, you know, we can see that it was happening with FTX and how they were interrelated with Alameda, but it didn't have the level of bookkeeping, you know, despite that there might be reconciliation delays, there still doesn't appear to be the bookkeeping or the legal documentation that does underlie a lot of that short-term securities lending, price discovery type activity in TradFi. So maybe legal documents aren't the answer. Maybe it's proof of reserves. Maybe it's something else. But yeah, we're itching towards now getting to what we need to get to those outcomes to protect consumers and investors.
So isn't that answer DeFi?
Yeah, that's what a lot of people are saying.
I mean, seriously,
Real-time compliance.
If we look at what's blown up, so a lot of the CeFi is blown up. Yes, there's been lots of hacks. I think something over 3.8 billion or something, I think it was, in DeFi. But looking under the hood of why the DeFi problems were there, it's not because of ownership of assets. It's because I hold my keys. I'm using that protocol. So the fundamentals of property ownership are available there in DeFi. So you probably see that, there is a lot of exploration by the large corporates into DeFi. So I think it's going to be an interesting space.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't see your comment, Vic, but I can just see vibe with nothing there, blank. Is that the point of the message?
No,
I think we've lost you.
Hi, hey, yeah, I'm trying to send an image in the chat, but basically, it feels like a snake eating its own tail at the moment. It's an intense experience. I don't know. My natural inclination when everything seems to go or seems to feel like it's just falling down around us is to lean into the work, lean into the tech, realize that, yeah, this is an opportunity to go out and, touch grass and, smell the roses, but I don't want to. Like, there's a reason this technology and this thematic and this industry is meaningful to me and meaningful to us, and it's because we care about it and we love what we do. So I think that it is important to observe that this is a moment where you're totally entitled to feel how you feel. You can feel angry, you can feel shocked, you can want to throw the towel in, but at the end of the day, we have to build from rubble. There was some interesting chats and conversations across the industry that I've been looking at over the past 72 hours. Looking on the legal eagle regulator interest side, looking at the IOSCO memorandum of understanding on cross-border securities. That seems to be a hope, a seedling of hope. Maybe this will progress collaborative efforts amongst regulators to produce, a safer environment. I'm not sure where I stand on how to achieve transparency of reserves, but one must observe that if there's centralized components of any system, they're points of failure at best, and quite dangerous entities within a system that can cause it to topple at worst, as we've now seen. So when we're dealing with centralized entities within the context of this industry and this technology, we need to start looking at what it looks like to have transparent reserves. So I would say I'm pretty bullish on asset proof, and I want to see how we don't need to wait for regulators to tell us how to do that. Binance is doing it now. They haven't built it out completely. It's still manual. It's not perfect, but it exists. So why don't we lean into that?
I think that it's extremely important for all of us to really speak to regulators and speak to the industry and explain what has happened in terms of DeFi versus CeFi. And because the problem is that people that are outside of the industry will commingle everything, and they'll just think that it's a crypto problem when in reality it isn't. And I think this was a point that we made in the submission to Treasury regarding the way in which you would regulate crypto exchanges, where our point there was basically that you don't speak in terms of decentralized versus centralized. You speak in terms of on-chain versus off-chain, and you ensure that almost every workflow that is off-chain is regulated with at least oversight, but the on-chain ones are different. And I think that seeing how Celsius versus Aave or Uniswap versus FTX have let's call it have unfolded, Gordon, to your point, going down an on-chain route and almost forcing more on-chain activity would be really, really good. But they could actually just put everything under the same bucket and make everything, much more difficult to access because of FTX-like activity.
Yeah, no, all very poignant observations. Well, I might call it to a close today if there's no further last opportunity to contribute any further items on the agenda for discussion.
Oh, Joanna, just quickly, I really like what you said, Arturo, about the on-chain, off-chain as opposed to CeFi, DeFi, because I mean, just looking at someone snipped the terms and conditions about what would happen with tokens. The tokens would remain yours with FTX, and they couldn't be used for anything else. So it's just classic. Well, who knows what happened, but it seems to be something that is familiar to me, having worked in centralized finance for over 20 years, is that someone hasn't complied with their terms and conditions, and someone who writes terms and conditions for these businesses, you always wonder whether people are going to be following them or whether the business owners actually know what they say and what their obligations are. And so it is a problem of centralized finance. It's an age-old problem of industry. And unfortunately, the thing that stops people breaching those obligations is regulation. But the transparency from things being on-chain would seem to me obviate the need for regulation, or at least enables consumers, users, to be aware of what's going on. So
I agree with that, Mark, and I think that there's an important part of the conversation, which is that people say they don't like regulation, and for multiple reasons. Now, as a builder, I think that the biggest issue that I would have with regulation is not necessarily the imposition of rules. It's more the obscene costs that typically come with the requirement of regulation. And usually that is a legal cost, custom legal cost now. But if, as a developer, you're bound by rules all the time because systems have rules and you're building on top of those. Now, if we were able to, and I think that this is kind of where your mind was at, if you're able to almost encode regulation so that it becomes trivial to follow, perhaps not even trivial to follow, but it's difficult not to follow, then people would have a different view on regulation, because it's just part of it, right? I don't need to spend several $100,000 on getting legal opinions when I deploy a token. I just know exactly what I need to do because it's kind of part of the system, right? Obviously, that has many different repercussions, right? Secondary effects, but the cost element of regulation, I think, is a big one, because let's call it the philosophical ones, those change very, very quickly as soon as people start understanding that having a general conversation about freedom is a bit of a waste of time unless you actually link it to an opposing constraint, right? Freedom from or freedom to do a specific thing. But yeah, it would be very, very interesting to see more people kind of come with solutions that actually address the issue with regulation for many developers, which are actually the costs and not necessarily the imposition of rules.
Yeah, I know very closely the huge industry that is compliance with regulations, and it's endless cost because as things change, regulations change, and then there's multi levels of compliance, and if it's just in code that's transparent, an enormous enabler for businesses and saving of costs.
Yeah, no, and it goes back to Gordon's point, like DeFi, having the rules there and that they just function. And so whether you can read the code or not, you still have a plain understanding of this is a lending protocol, or this is an information protocol, or whatever the function is, it's conveyed to you. We still have a lot of work in trying to make source code in plain language. But yeah, there's got to be some sort of middle ground that we start finding that doesn't cost as much as you say, Arturo. So, okay, well, last round for any final comments. All right, everybody's happy.
Arturo, it's good to see we've got a purpose here to reduce the cost. So let's go for it. That's why I'm here. I'm a little guy.
For the little guys and girls and everyone. All right, thank you for your time, everybody, today, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks all. Bye.
Yes.
Bye.